You have talked to them one-on-one. I don't care what, not pass judgment on anyone unless you have talked to them one-on-one. I don't care what the story is.
They are still talking about 30 years later. The 1993 conversation between Michael Jackson and Oprah Winfrey falls firmly into the second category. It was watched by over 90 million people on the night it aired. At the time, it was one of the most watched television events in American history.
When did the color of your skin start to change?
Oh boy, sometime after Thriller, around Off the Wall Thriller, sometime
And what did you
around there.
think? I mean,
It's in my family. My father said it's on his side. I can't control it. I don't understand. I mean, it makes
It's
me very
imaginable.
sad.
So,
And then came
I
one of the
just want
most-
to get this straight.
Yeah.
You are not taking anything to change the color of your skin?
Oh God, no.
You did not purposely?
We're trying
For
to
good
control.
reason. Because what happened during that interview was not what anyone expected. Michael Jackson sat across from Oprah and answered questions he had never answered publicly before. He talked about his childhood, about his skin, about his face, about the accusations being thrown at him. And then Oprah asked him something that stopped the room. She asked him about his virginity, and Michael Jackson did not laugh it off. He did not dodge it politely. He pushed back, directly, in a way that made it very clear he was not comfortable with where the conversation had gone. And that moment, that specific exchange, has been discussed and debated ever since. This is the story of that interview, what led to it, what happened inside it, and what Michael Jackson's reaction to that question actually tells us about the man behind the most famous face in the world. By 1993, Michael Jackson had not given a major television interview in years. He was one of the biggest names on earth, but he kept the press at a distance. He spoke through his music, through his performances, through carefully controlled public appearances. But he rarely sat down and talked. That changed in February 1993. Oprah Winfrey had built a relationship with Michael Jackson over time. She was one of the few people in the public eye he seemed to trust, at least enough to agree to what became a live interview broadcast from Neverland Ranch. The decision to do the interview was not casual. Michael Jackson and his team understood exactly what they were walking into. He had been the subject of relentless media attention for years. His appearance had changed dramatically since his days as a young performer with the Jackson 5. His personal life was the subject of constant speculation. Rumors followed him everywhere. The interview was meant to be a chance to set some things straight, to speak directly to the public without a tabloid filter, to let people see the real Michael Jackson, or at least the version of himself he was willing to share. What nobody quite predicted was how far Oprah would push, and what nobody anticipated was how Michael Jackson would respond when she did. The interview took place at Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson's home, his private world, a place he had built to be a refuge from everything outside its gates. Walking through Neverland for the cameras that night, viewers saw something they had never seen before. The amusement park rides, the animals, the elaborate rooms filled with art and memories. It was a glimpse into a life that most people could barely imagine. Michael Jackson seemed more relaxed than many expected. He smiled. He laughed at certain points. He showed Oprah around his home with something that looked almost like pride. For a man who had spent years being described in the press as deeply strange, he came across as warm, thoughtful, and surprisingly grounded. But the interview was not going to stay comfortable. Oprah had not come to Neverland to do a tour. She had come to ask the questions that
Imaginable.
millions of
So,
Something
okay,
like
I just
that.
want to get this straight.
Yeah.
You are not taking anything to change the color of your skin?
Oh God, no.
You did not purposely?
We're trying to control it, and using makeup evens it out because it makes blotches on the skin, and I have to even out my skin.
And she was very good at her job. She started with his childhood, and that is where the first real weight of the conversation began to show. When Oprah asked about his father, something shifted in Michael Jackson's face. The relaxed version of him that had walked her through Neverland became something quieter and more careful. He talked about his father, Joseph Jackson, with a combination of respect and pain that was hard to watch. He said his father was a tough man, that discipline in the Jackson household was strict in ways that crossed lines. He confirmed that he had been hit as a child, that rehearsals were not optional, that failure had consequences. He talked about how he would sometimes get sick before performances as a child because the pressure and the fear were so great. He talked about seeing his father in the crowd and feeling his stomach drop instead of feeling supported. But he also said he believed his father's push had made him what he was, that the discipline, however hard it had been to live through, had produced a work ethic and a standard of performance that he carried into everything he did. It was a complicated answer about a complicated relationship. And it was honest in a way that the public had not heard from Michael Jackson before. He was not performing in that moment. He was remembering, and the memory clearly still carried weight. Oprah handled those early parts of the interview carefully. She pressed, but she did not push past what he seemed willing to give. That balance would not last through the whole conversation. One of the most significant parts of the interview came when Oprah asked about Michael Jackson's appearance, specifically about the change in his skin color over the years.
When did the color of your skin start to change?
Oh boy, sometime after Thriller, around Off the Wall Thriller,
And
sometime
what did you
around there.
think? I mean,
It's in my family. My father said it's on his side. I can't control it. I don't understand. I mean, it makes me very sad.
And then came one of the
This
most
was one of the most discussed topics surrounding Michael Jackson at that time. His skin had become dramatically lighter since his early career. Theories had circulated for years. Some people said he had bleached his skin deliberately. Others claimed surgery. The tabloids had pushed every possible version of the story. Michael Jackson told Oprah he had a condition called vitiligo, a skin condition that causes the loss of pigment in patches across the body. He said it ran in his family. He said there was nothing he could do to reverse it. He said that the makeup he wore was used to even out the appearance of his skin, not to make himself look white. He became emotional during this part of the interview. He said it was something he had not chosen and something he could not control. He said the idea that he wanted to be something other than what he was born as was painful to him. At the time, many people were skeptical. The diagnosis of vitiligo was treated by parts of the press as a convenient excuse. But years later, after his death, the autopsy confirmed that Michael Jackson did in fact have vitiligo. The patches of pigment loss were documented. He had been telling the truth. But that night in 1993, Oprah kept going. And the next question she asked was the one that changed the entire tone of the conversation. At a certain point in the interview, Oprah Winfrey asked Michael Jackson whether he was a virgin. The question landed in the room like something unexpected. Not because it was the most shocking thing anyone had ever asked on television, but because of who was being asked, and because of what he had just been through in the interview up to that point. He had talked about his father, about his skin condition, about years of painful speculation about his private life. And now this. Michael Jackson's reaction was immediate, and it was real. He did not smile politely and deflect. He did not give a rehearsed answer designed to move the conversation along. He visibly reacted. His body language changed. He looked directly at Oprah and made clear that he considered the question out of bounds. He told her that was a private matter, that it was between him and God, that some things were not for public discussion, and that his personal life in that area was one of them. There was an edge to how he said it. Not anger exactly, but something firm. Something that communicated that he had limits and that she had just reached one of them. It was one of the rare moments in that interview where Michael Jackson stopped being accommodating and became direct in a way that surprised people watching. Oprah moved on. But the moment stayed. To understand why Michael Jackson reacted the way he did, you have to think about his life up to that point. From the time he was a child, almost nothing about Michael Jackson had been considered private. His family life was public. His career was public. His relationships were public. The tabloids wrote about him constantly. His face was on covers around the world. Every change in his appearance was analyzed. Every person he was seen with became a story. He had grown up in public in a way that very few people ever experience. He had been performing since he was a small child. His entire development, from childhood to adulthood, had happened in front of cameras and crowds and reporters. So when someone asked him about something as personal as his sexual history on live television in front of 90 million people, his reaction was not an overreaction. It was the response of a man who had spent his entire life having his privacy taken from him, and who had finally decided that this particular thing was going to stay his. The virginity question was not the most important thing asked in that interview. But it was the moment that showed something real about Michael Jackson. That underneath the performances and the public persona and the carefully managed image, there was a person with limits, a person who could say no, and saying no in that moment, in front of that audience, took something. Because Michael Jackson understood better than anyone what the press would do with a no. He said it anyway, stepping back from any single moment in the interview and looking at the whole picture. What the 1993 Oprah conversation revealed was a Michael Jackson that much of the public had not seen before. He was thoughtful. He spoke carefully, but not in a way that felt scripted. He showed genuine emotion when the topics deserved it. He was funny in small moments. He was serious when the weight of a question required it. He was also clearly a man who had been carrying a lot for a very long time. The childhood he described was not a normal one. The relationship with his father had left marks that he carried into adulthood. The years of media attention had shaped him in ways that he was only beginning to be able to talk about. He talked about loneliness, about the difficulty of forming real relationships when everyone around you has some kind of interest in who you are and what you represent, about the challenge of knowing who to trust when your name alone is worth so much to so many different people. These were not the answers of someone performing for the camera. These were the answers of someone who had been given a rare space to speak and was trying, carefully, to use it honestly. Whether the interview achieved what Michael Jackson hoped it would is harder to say. It humanized him for many viewers. It gave context to things that had been misrepresented for years. But the press, for the most part, took the most dramatic pieces and ran with those. The Vitiligo revelation, the father comments, the virginity exchange, the nuance in between got less attention. In the months after the interview aired, life for Michael Jackson did not get easier. In fact, it got significantly harder. Later in 1993, the first serious allegations against him became public. Everything that had been carefully addressed in the Oprah interview was suddenly buried under a wave of coverage that had nothing to do with vitiligo or childhood memories. The allegations changed everything. They changed how the public saw him. They changed how the industry treated him. They changed the financial picture around his career in ways that would take years to fully understand. Some people who watched the Oprah interview later wondered whether it had been a mistake, whether sitting down and opening up had somehow made him more vulnerable, whether the attempt to humanize himself had backfired by reminding people that he existed as a real person rather than a distant icon. Michael Jackson himself never publicly said he regretted the interview. But he also never did anything quite like it again for many years. The openness of that night in 1993 was not something he repeated easily. The relationship between Oprah Winfrey and Michael Jackson after the 1993 interview is worth understanding because it adds another layer to the story. In the years that followed, Oprah made comments about Michael Jackson in various settings that he and the people around him felt were unfair. There were moments where she appeared to distance herself from him publicly in ways that he noticed. After his death, Oprah spoke about him again. She gave interviews. She offered opinions. And some of the people who had been close to Michael Jackson felt that what she said in those years after he was gone did not match the warmth she had shown during the 1993 interview. Michael Jackson had expressed privately to people around him that he felt certain powerful figures in the media had turned on him. He did not always name names, but he spoke about the experience of building relationships with people in public life and then watching those relationships disappear when things became difficult. Whether Oprah falls into that category is something that people who study Michael Jackson's life debate. What is clear is that the 1993 interview represented a high point of public trust between them, and that what came after was more complicated. When most people talk about the 1993 Oprah interview, they focus on the biggest moments: the skin condition, the father, the virginity exchange. And those moments matter. But what often gets missed is the quieter parts of the conversation. The moments where Michael Jackson talked about art and creativity and what music meant to him. The moments where he described the experience of performing and why he needed it. The moments where he talked about wanting to help people and about the responsibility he felt toward his audience. He talked about children with a genuine warmth that came across as completely unperformed. He said that children were the most honest audience he had ever had, that they responded to truth in a way that adults often did not. That being around children reminded him of what mattered. He talked about his own lost childhood with a sadness that was quiet rather than dramatic. He did not ask for sympathy. He just stated it as a fact, that he had grown up working, that the things other children did, the things he saw in movies and read about in books, were not things he had experienced, and that this had left a space in him that he spent a large part of his adult life trying to fill. These parts of the interview matter because they are the parts that explain Michael Jackson most honestly. Not the speculation, not the tabloid stories, but his own words about his own life, spoken in a moment when he had chosen to be as open as he knew how to be. The 1993 Oprah interview remains one of the most watched and most discussed television moments of its time. 30 years later, people still go back to it. They still pull out specific moments, for they still debate what it meant and what it revealed. The virginity question is one of those moments. Not because of what Michael Jackson said, but because of how he said it. Because of the way he drew a line in front of 90 million people and held it. Because in a life where almost nothing had ever been considered off limits by the press, he decided that this one thing was going to stay his. That reaction tells you something about him. about what he valued, about where the performance ended and the person began, about a man who had given the world so much of himself for so long that holding on to one small private corner of his life had become something he was willing to fight for, even on live television. Michael Jackson was not perfect. His life was complicated in ways that are still being understood. But in that interview, in that room at Neverland, he was honest. He answered what he could answer. He pushed back when he needed to. And he showed the world a version of himself that was more real than anything the tabloids had ever printed. That is why people are still watching it. That is why that moment still lands the way it does. Because real moments, even on television, have a way of lasting. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this gave you a new way of looking at that interview, like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There is still a lot more of this story worth telling.